What you are about to hear is an excerpt from Prime On Demand, a Transformers podcast available on iTunes, Stitcher, or primeondemand.com. This is from episode 3. The topic for this episode, Marvel's The Transformers, issue number 2. Well, for the first part of our main segment, we'll begin back into the reviews for the original comic series from Marvel back in 1984. This is for issue number 2. The cover, of course, says number 2 in a 4-issue limited series. The cover is Megatron shooting Optimus in the face while stomping Bumblebee. It says Optimus Prime versus Megatron. On the first page, there's this little paragraph at the beginning that ends up being used, I believe, in every issue afterward, from issue 2 onward. 4 million years ago, they came from Cybertron, a world composed entirely of machinery. A world torn by an age-old war between the heroic Autobots and the evil Decepticons. These incredibly powerful living robots, capable of converting themselves into land and air vehicles, weapons, and other mechanical forms, continue their conflict here on Earth. They are the Transformers. And this issue is called Power Play. It looks like the same credits as last issue, written by Bill Mantlo, and Jim Salicrup. Frank Springer pencils. In a scene rather similar to the first episode, the Decepticons are standing near looks like a power plant in Oregon, and they decide to take the resources for themselves. Megatron wants them to go in all gung-ho, guns a-blazing, and Starscream points out the fact that it would be better to send a scout first. He mentions Buzzsaw. And Megatron, internally, begrudgingly recognizes the fact that Starscream is, in fact, correct here. But being a little pissant, Megatron decides to send Ravage instead. Soundwave has Megatron's helmet here, misdrawn for some reason. That's kind of cool, though. Ravage goes out to scout the plant. And, as luck would have it, there's someone who appears to be a reporter walking around talking into a tape recorder, and Ravage decides to jump into his tape bag and sneak his way around, with the guy reporting information directly onto Ravage. When he gets back to Megatron, he informs him of the shocking fact that these little tiny flesh baggy things are actually the sentient life form on the planet, not the machinery. How odd. And they remember back to the battle at the drive-in theater. Starscream recognizes Megatron's intelligence and realizes that he should never underestimate Megatron, although he goes on to do so on several different occasions. Knowing what they know about the station, they go into attack mode. They start flying away, and Soundwave jumps into one of the cockpits. This issue gets into more instances of people using their individual powers. Thundercracker using a sonic boom as an attack against the humans. Starscream's cluster bombs. I'm always surprised when Ravage shows stealth. It happens here, it happens in Revenge of the Fallen. Like, you don't hear that big cat robot next to you. More individualized powers. Frenzy, disrupting electronic equipment. Kind of an EMP blast, sort of. Once they end the attack against the humans, Rumble takes up the plates a little bit to begin the dismantling process. For them to take the technology that they need. In the next scene, we get back to the Witwicky house / auto repair shop. I don't think the city would allow that kind of zoning. There's a house, then an auto repair shop, then a junkyard. I don't think that would fly. And the scene gets back to where we left off in the first issue, with Bumblebee crying for help, and Buster having absolutely no idea how to fix a car, because he spent all that time reading those damn stupid books, Neanderthal, and his dad thinks that the voice coming out of Bumblebee is some kind of a joke. And try as he might, Buster is just trying to convince him that Bumblebee is alive. At this point, Buster believes he's alive, although that's kind of a big leap in conclusion to make, but at this point, I'll go with it. Yeah, his dad thinks that the guy O is up in the cab. There's a shot here that looks Buster look like what's his face, Prince something. Prince Adam. And Buster tries to explain what happened to his dad's car, that it was lost, probably destroyed. And his dad is, of course, not buying any of it. Buster makes this little hand motion that's kind of similar to something Soundwave does in the episode that I'll mention later on. And his dad pretty quickly recognizes the problem going on, the leak in the undercarriage. And his dad just thinks that he was drugged by the popcorn. With him unable to convince his dad to help out of compassion for a life form, he tries the prideful, complimentary route, telling his dad, if anyone can fix this, it's you. You're the best car mechanic in the state. Or whatever. But Sparkplug assumes that this kid's going to keep pestering about it until he fixes it, so he gives it a shot. And when he finishes fixing Bumblebee, he says that it was a relatively simple repair in terms of what had to be done, but it took him so long to figure it out because alien tech. It took him hours, apparently, to just fix what he says just a couple of things. The Star Trek reference. He says, blast it, son. I'm a mechanic, not a doctor. With Bumblebee healed, he goes ahead and transforms and stands up. And again, more kind of clunky robot dialogue here. Like, thank you for both of your heroic efforts, my young fleshy friends, that kind of thing. Oh, Bumblebee says that his Sparkplug's mag skills are almost as good as Ratchet's. I highly doubt that. Bumblebee needs fuel, and mentions the fact that Huffer might be able to synthesize some fuel from Earth resources. See, Huffer is supposed to do something in the comics here, something I'm going to touch on later on in the episode review. And Sparkplug mentions, hey, maybe I can figure out something, because apparently a mechanic is also a chemist, but whatever. Bumblebee mentions the Ark. Buster's like, gee willikers, I'd really love to see a real spaceship. I don't like to brag, but I've been inside a real spaceship. At the NASA base in Florida, they have a bunch of stuff you can tour around and see, and they have a decommissioned shuttle sitting there. You can go up some airplane stairs, stair car, and walk around inside the shuttle for a little bit. Just, I have one thing up on Buster, up inside a spaceship. So Bumblebee is off to get back to Optimus and tell him that they have a way to synthesize some fuel. And they made contact with some humans, making an alliance with them. Along the way, Bumblebee briefly gives a recap of the first issue to Buster and to new readers who might not have picked up the first issue last month. And again, more of Ravage looking in the shadows right next to these guys. Like, he's in broad daylight at this point. And as luck would have it, Jesse and O are walking around downtown. And how lucky for Ravage that O has a beatbox next to him and recognizes them as being humans he saw at the drive-in. He hops inside that stereo. And as luck would have it, Jesse and O see Bumblebee and Buster. And they let him know that the Decepticons have struck the power plant that we saw in the beginning of this issue. Buster tries to explain to them that the car is alive, but they ain't buying that shit. They talk about the power plant, and Ravage hears all of this. So now, he knows that they know, and then Megatron is going to know that they know that, never mind. The computer in the Ark notifies Optimus that the fuel is low, and funnily enough, it talks about itself in the first person. Mirage proposes the idea that they steal some energy, something the Autobots don't usually do, and this somewhat a little bit conflicts with his pacifist personality that they touch on later in this issue and in the episode that I'll talk about later on. Ratchet talks about leaking lubricants. And Ratchet, who's usually pretty compassionate, says that the humans are not life forms like us. But Prowl says they can't steal it because life forms have a right to the things they own, especially to the things on the planet. Optimus proposes a trade of Cybertron's technology, something he doesn't do in the movieverse. Mirage wonders to himself whether or not he should trade sides. Not sure if this will show up again in the third issue, but definitely shows up in the third episode. So Optimus decides they'll go with the trading plan. So apparently Bumblebee decided to turn around and hightail it back to the junkyard, where they built a little radio and gives them all the information they have about the attack, the drive-in, what happened to Bumblebee, meeting the humans, the Decepticons' newest attack, and the fact that they made an alliance, and one of them can synthesize a fuel. So they can finally fire Huffer. Seriously, in the cartoon, all Huffer ever does is bitch. He bitches more than Gears. I like Gears. Well, I guess I don't need to trade tech anymore. Little mistake in this transformation panel. Prowl and Sunstreaker switch sides. And as the Autobot convoy drives away up a 90-degree angle, they leave Ratchet in charge of the base. Where he will be for quite a while, it looks like. Here we go. They finally got around to building a bit of a Decepticon base. It does honestly look kind of impressive compared to Darkmount. And with this new information, when Megatron knows that there's a human who can synthesize Cybertronian fuel, they decide to try to abduct him. And all the Autobots are in the street outside the Wiki House. Kind of touched on in the 2007 movie. Optimus goes into robot mode and pulls out his rifle for some reason. I don't know why. I'll probably foresaw the attack. And briefly gives them just confirming the kinds of things that Bumblebee said from Cybertron, gives them help. And another boom from Thundercracker as the Seekers show up. I guess I should just clear this up. They're not yet called Seekers. I am saying Seekers to make myself more clear. And of course, Bumblebee is the one charged with trying to protect the humans. And they decided to hide in a crappy wrecked car body because that'll help. Overall, this issue feels a lot more like Transformers than the first one did. It's finding its footing more as the story progresses. The twins go into attack mode, and Sideswipe starts using his jetpack. That's nice to see. So he's the one Autobot who should fly, because he has a jetpack. Apparently, I think Wheeljack also is supposed to have a jetpack, but he never really uses it that way. Jetfire, of course, because he's a plane. I just loved in the first year of the comics, in the first season of the TV show, how there was much, much less in terms of which Autobots are able to fly. Of course, we get into Season 2, there's Trax, and the aerial bots, what have you. Power Glide. I just love the simpler times of the first season of the show. Kind of an awkward transformation sequence for the Seekers there. Sideswipe mentions his thirst for blood. It's kind of creepy. Sunstreaker mentions his egotism, how he wants his opponent to look at him, admire him, before he's slaughtered. The humans shall not be taken, so swears Optimus. That almost sounds like a movie line. Mirage briefly reminisces about simpler times back on Cybertron. I'd rather be retro wing gliding. I thought it's kind of nice, talking a little bit about the culture, kind of sports, I guess, of Cybertron. Occasionally they get into that kind of thing. McAdams' Old Oil House, the Gladiator Pits and Kaon. They get a little bit into sports and recreation on Cybertron, but no one ever really goes too far into it. There's the whole bit about Drag Strip and Blur in IDW. But again, these kinds of things are few and far between. I appreciate it anytime a writer goes a little bit out of their way to mention more of the culture on Cybertron, the antebellum culture. Neighbors call the police, and the police show up for 2 panels, say fuck this, and turn around and go home. Jesse and O are there apparently. That come out of nowhere. And Ravage pounces on Mirage. And he actually tries to talk to Ravage to convince him that they want to stop fighting. That he hates the brother against brother kind of fighting. During this, Brawn sneaks up behind them and smacks Ravage off of Mirage. And despite this little brief display of violence, Mirage still thanks him. I mean, he did save his life, I assume, but, Mirage tried at least. And Megatron decides it's time for him to take part in the battle. Just as Bumblebee assumes the battle is almost won, Megatron comes up behind him and punches him straight down, right in the head. and one of the Witwickies says he's been KO'd. Megatron grabs Sparkplug and tries to take him, and Buster, yelling for help, gets the attention of Optimus, who then verbally confronts Megatron, who responds with a fusion cannon blast. There's this nicely drawn panel of Optimus shooting toward Megatron, and apparently Megatron's shield, or car, is enough to stop the laser rifle. Megatron mentions that Optimus always did used to fight with his mouth more than his fists. And Optimus hurls an engine block at his face. Megatron calls his master plan the invasion of Lost Cybertron. Lost Cybertron. Not sure what that might mean. Right now, it's kind of similar to Dark Cybertron. Starscream grabs Sparkplug. Ravage and Megatron transform into a gun and a tape, hop into the planes, and they're out of there. Buster appeals to Optimus to go after them to try to get his dad back. Optimus agrees they need to, but they are way too low on fuel. There's absolutely nothing they can do, and no way to get more fuel. They are SOL. Next, along came a Spider-Man. So, as I said, overall this issue feels much more closer to what Transformers became than the first issue did. One thing I loved about the first issue is that it is so different. But someone like me who was born afterward, or certainly who saw the newer things first before seeing this comic version, early parts of issue 1, especially everything on Cybertron, seems so much different from the usual Transformers story that we get. The character designs are quite different throughout this entire comic series, actually. There's some ideas in this early part of the issue that are never really touched on again later, although a lot of Marvel was like that. It's kind of a training ground for Transformers ideas that were some dropped by the wayside, some used in the cartoon, some used in the movie, and some ideas have carried over into today. And as I said earlier, it's looking like Josie Beller, who so far has only appeared in the Marvel series, might end up being in Dark of the Moon. So still to this day, they're finding new relative term, things in the Marvel series that have never been used again, and finding new twists and new spins for those ideas. For already read the entire Marvel series, I can tell you that issue 2 feels a lot more like the rest of the series, instead of compared to issue number 1. So issue 2 does a lot more in terms of the series finding its footing, although as I have said, that footing is a little bit shaky. The Marvel series is not the best version of Transformers. I do enjoy it, that's why I wanted to review it, but you can definitely see where it's progressing itself along, slow and steady and all that. Of course, next episode, we'll be getting into the third issue. This has been an excerpt from Prime On Demand, a Transformers podcast. For full episodes, go to iTunes, Stitcher, or primeondemand.com.